Hello, everyone. This is a review for the midterm exam to give you some sense of what I was looking for in answers, so that in the absence of any helpful comments that I may make, and there probably will be an absence, you have this video to give you a sense of what I was looking for, so that if you have any questions about how I graded your midterm exam and how I evaluated particular answers, please watch this video first. And then feel free to contact me afterwards if you have more specific or continuing concerns. So, yes, it's a midterm exam, and let's look first at the directions. Answer each of these questions in essay form. That was a signal that your answers should be discursive. Um, they should be substantial. Essay form. I didn't define essay form, but essay form isn't two sentences or three sentences or a throwaway remark. It's developed thought. So that was a signal that I was looking for, substantive answers and not just sort of a comment or two. Also, that each one of your answers must be based on your personal reading of the text. So I was looking for specifics. I was looking for things that were the kind of things that an individual would have, thoughts they'd have in response to reading these things, rather than the kind of generalities that you would get from a secondary source or especially from the robot, which is my name for ChatGPT. The robot's really bad, actually, and his answers or its answers, I should say, are awful. Do not consult secondary sources. That's important, right? That is, this is supposed to be based on your encounter with the text, not something you've glommed off of some other secondary account of it. Your answers should avoid generalities and get down to the specifics of the text. That is really to show what you know, to show what you've gotten out of your personal reading of these things, not to repeat things that you've heard or read from other sources. So that's important, right? I mean, if you did those things, if you did obviously rely on secondary sources, if you did just stay on the level of generalities and not gotten down to specifics, then you would not have done well. And again, if you have questions about that, please let me know. So let's take a look at the questions. Okay. So question one, explain why the first part of this course is called The Individual and Reality. There is no one way of answering this, obviously. It's a general theme for the first two texts, the Bhagavad Gita and Huxley's Doors of Perception. But as I explained in my introduction to that unit of the course, I was interested in how the questions of reality are basically metaphysical questions, questions of what is real, are encountered by these two individuals. One, of course, the sort of mythic individual of Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita, and the other, Aldous Huxley himself. How each of them confronted reality or was confronted with reality. And I think that what was really salient in both of those encounters was the way that their notion of what reality was changed. I would think that's really the leading idea in comparing these two texts and thinking of them under this rubric of the individual and reality, is that both of them in some way or another undergo a kind of a crisis. Certainly Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita does, when he asks the question, or when he makes his decision not to fight. And the god Krishna is trying to correct him, really, because the decision not to fight, not to act, is actually the wrong decision. Krishna doesn't just say you should fight, he gives his reasons why. And the most fundamental of those reasons is because Arjuna is missing what's truly real. Perhaps the most direct response to Arjuna's reluctance to engage in battle and possibly kill these men that he knows in battle is that Krishna is reminding him that he's not really killing them and they're not really dead. That is, that what is truly real in everything is not what can be touched, not what can be picked up with your hand or seen with the eye or heard with the ear. That level of reality is really illusion. The level that we seem to know through the senses, having to do with nature and bodies, both biological bodies and just inanimate bodies. Anything that we know through the senses is really illusion, and what's real is what's underneath that, what is unchanging and permanent and eternal. So Arjuna is given in response to his problem really a philosophy lesson, a lesson in metaphysics in the sense of lesson in what is real, and what is real turns out to be the Atman, the soul, the unmanifest, or the soul that is not seen or heard or in any way sensed, but the permanent soul that is hidden from the senses but available to the intellect. The self that you are and that I am, and that connects us up with what's truly real, is not something that's born, not something that can die, but something eternal. And it's the eternal and the unchangeless that represents what's truly real. So what it turns out is that Arjuna is just on the wrong track in general, and caring about the outcome of the battle, who gets killed, things like that, that these are distractions from what he really needs to do, which is to get in touch with reality. I mean, if you're worried about what is going on the level of the senses, you're not concentrating on what's important. What's important is what's truly real, and what's truly real is not that. It's a changeless order that underlies that. So they presumably, I mean, Arjuna's whole notion of what is real, and therefore what matters, is transformed by what Krishna has to say. I don't think it would be exactly correct to describe what Huxley goes through in his mescaline experience as crisis, but it certainly is a similar experience insofar as an individual is, as Huxley would say. I don't know, we may doubt the authenticity of what Huxley experienced in terms of whether he really learned anything about reality, but Huxley himself certainly views his mescaline experience as revealing to him a level of reality, or a level of reality, a depth to reality that he didn't really know before. That's not a crisis in the Arjuna sense, but it's a similar experience insofar as his eyes are opened, at least temporarily, while he's under the influence of the drug. And he is led into an aspect of reality that he didn't know before. Now, exactly what that is, it's certainly not the same sort of experience, and whatever truth that Huxley supposedly was able to get to because of the use of mescaline was certainly not the same sort of thing that is going on in the Bhagavad Gita. That is, it's not as if it's sort of like the ideal underpinnings of reality in some way. It's an experience of reality in which the practical concerns of everyday life are shut out, so that Huxley is able to experience, especially ordinary objects, in what he says their full thinghood or their full being. So that ordinary things like a flower, or even the folds of cloth in his pant leg, become these sort of miraculous things because, not because, he's just able to see them in a way that he's never seen before. And what seems to come out is just the reality of ordinary things, ordinary experiences. He doesn't have the kind of visions or spectacular cinematic or phantasmagorical things that he might have anticipated before he took the drug. The drug is really a transformation of the ordinary. But ordinary things become miraculous. Ordinary things show their being and their connection with everything else too. That's really important. The way that he comes to think of reality, the mescaline reality, what he calls the antipodes of the mind, as a direct experience of being, and that the being of ordinary objects is transcendental. I mean, in the sense that it transcends its own limits and gives us some notion of reality as a whole. So that's kind of where I was thinking of in terms of answers for the first question, individual and reality. Question two, explain why the second part of this course is called rational inquiry. Well, the second part of this course really is quite different. Even though Plato, in his metaphysics, is, I would say, very similar to the Bhagavad Gita. What he actually does in the Meno and the Phaedo is quite different from the kind of philosophical experience from the first two texts. It's rational inquiry in the sense that it is careful reasoning. And a careful, rational inquiry into a very definite subject matter. In the Meno is the question, what is virtue? And then the related question, whether virtue is teachable. And in the Phaedo, it's the question about whether the soul can actually go on and continue to exist after its separation from the body, which is essentially the question of life after death, or the immortality of the soul. These questions, what is virtue and whether the soul is immortal, are being addressed in a rational way, insofar as they are being addressed through argumentation, which is essentially reasoning on the basis of acceptable premises and trying to come to some conclusion which is defensible in argument. That is, not saying, well, I mean, compare what Plato or Socrates says in the beginning of the Phaedo about why the philosopher welcomes death with some of his actual arguments in favor of the immortality of the soul. The first argument is really not an argument at all. It's an assumption about what true knowledge is, and then a certain, I don't know, inference about why the philosopher then welcomes death. That is, if indeed we can only know reality and truth in its fullness after we die, then the philosopher should not be upset about death. But that's a kind of a myth. I mean, in the sense that it doesn't actually examine its premises or critique its own premises. It's a kind of a story. It may be true, but it's still kind of a story. Now, compare that with any one of his arguments for the immortality of the soul. Let's say something as flimsy, really, as the argument from opposites. At least it is an attempt at a rational defense of immortality. It doesn't just assume that immortality exists or that the soul is immortal. Try to actually give reasons, or look at his argument, so-called argument from affinity, where he says that it is the soul that gives us access to what is truly real. And if what is truly real is changeless and eternal, then the soul must share in the nature of that and itself be changeless and eternal. Those are attempts at actually giving a rational grounding to the belief in immortality. They may not be very good arguments, but they are purely rational inquiry. So it's a certain method, rational inquiry. That's really called, the second part of the course is called that because of any Platonic dialogue, any standard one like the Meno or the Phaedo, is an exercise in rational inquiry into truth, which is oftentimes partial and doesn't come to any definite conclusion because it is rational, because it demands proof, demands argumentation. So that's really where I was going with the second question. Question three, evaluate the Meno. What did it set out to do? Was it successful in doing it? Why or why not? So that's a several-part question, right? That is, first of all, the first question is two questions. What did it set out to do? That is, what was the purpose what was Plato's purpose in the Meno? And secondly, did it actually achieve its purpose? Was it successful in doing it? And in your reasons why. So again, that is not to be answered in only one way. And I'm open to different answers, but I think that one could say that, and there are multiple answers. I mean, if you say that, well, what did the Meno set out to do to define virtue? to identify the essence of virtue and what the commonalities of all things that we call virtues: justice, wisdom, courage, moderation, that makes them virtues in the first place, to isolate that common essence. You could say that that was the purpose of the Meno, and I think you have reasons in favor of that. Was it successful in doing it? Well, again, there's not one answer to that. There is a definite point you could make that it wasn't successful at all, because the conversation gets off track, and Meno refuses to follow up that question, and it gets into other questions. So you could say that it wasn't successful at all. But if you say that what it set out to do is something different, if you say that what it set out to do is to show the value of rational inquiry or something like that, then maybe it did succeed. If you might think that the real purpose of the dialogue was to prove that knowledge is recollection. And then, did it actually prove that with the demonstration with the slave boy, with the geometry? So again, I'm not looking for one particular answer, but something along those lines. Evaluate, find out, what did it set out to do? Was it successful in doing it? Why or why not? I would say it's maybe a little easier, for me at least, to say personally what the Phaedo is about, what it's setting out to do. It's trying to prove that the soul is immortal. It does a lot of other things too. But for me, the central purpose of the Phaedo is to prove that the soul is immortal. So really the question of its success is whether it actually proves that. And that would be looking at the actual argumentation, the actual arguments that Socrates offers in favor of the immortality of the soul. So really the why or why not is really, do you think that those arguments were successful? If you do think they're successful, the dialogue as a whole is successful. If you don't think they're successful, then it wasn't. Now, there are other answers for what the Phaedo set out to do. And I'm open to them, but I think what would be a bad answer would be to prove that, philosophy is good or something. Again, you want to stay away from generalities that are so general that they don't say anything, You might say, I think with a lot of reason, that yes, the dialogue is really about how philosophy as Socrates does it is actually worthwhile, even if it can't reach the certainty about matters like whether there's life after death. Now, that would be an interesting thing. And again, it all is in the why or why not. If you can make a case for it, then that's all I could ask. So that's what I have to say about the midterm exam. Again, if after watching this video, you might have still very reasonably have additional questions about how I graded your exam, feel free to contact me.